I heard you say that if what the Washington Post and New York Times reported is true, how did you characterize this?
This is the most serious accusation ever made against the sitting president relating to national security.
Ever?
If it's true. I can't think of any other president who has ever put in danger the national security, if it's true.
Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news with a striking bottom line. According to the Washington Post and the New York Times, the President of the United States revealed highly classified, beyond top secret information to this country's chief global adversary, Russia, during a meeting last week in the Oval Office. This meeting with Russia's ambassador and Russia's foreign minister, a day after he fired FBI Director James Comey, who was obviously leading the investigation into possibly improper contact with Russia. Now, the Post broke the story. Their reporting suggests that when the president revealed this intelligence, reportedly gathered by an ally and not to be shared with other countries, he was boasting to the Russians about what he had. As you might imagine, this is touching off a firestorm in the intelligence community on Capitol Hill and beyond. We have our own new reporting on what the intelligence covered, and late reaction from the White House. Reporting for us, we have a team of correspondents: Jim Acosta, Evan Perez, Manu Raju, Jim Sciutto. But first, Jim Acosta joins us now from the White House. So, Jim, explain how the White House is reacting, because several people who were in that office have put out statements, although in some cases they're not really addressing what the actual reporting said.
That's right. I think it's safe to say, Anderson, at this hour, the White House is knocking down that story in the Washington Post. They are saying it is false as reported, but in a carefully worded statement, you could hear the National Security Advisor to the President, H.R. McMaster, addressing reporters earlier this evening, really tailoring his words to declare that this story is just not accurate. Here's what he had to say.
There's nothing that the president takes more seriously than the security of the American people. The story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. The president and the foreign minister reviewed a range of common threats to our two countries, including threats to civil aviation. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
And that was it, Anderson. H.R. McMaster did not take any questions from reporters. There were reporters asking, including myself, whether there was a recording of this meeting between the president and those Russian officials. He did not answer that question, but we should point out, you heard H.R. McMaster there say that the president did not reveal any sources or methods. He did not specifically say that the president did not reveal classified information. That's a pretty important distinction there. We should note that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the deputy press secretary, just went back into the West Wing a few moments ago, talked to reporters and said there would be no further statements from the White House on this later on tonight. Anderson.
It's also important that the story that as it first appeared in the Washington Post, specifically, it did not say that the president revealed sources and methods in what he said to the Russians. So for H.R. McMaster to be saying the president didn't reveal sources and methods, the Washington Post didn't say that's what he did.
That's right. And there are additional statements that were provided by the White House tonight from the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, from a Deputy National Security Advisor, Dina Powell, that sort of dance around that distinction. We can put up a statement from Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, that says, during President Trump's meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov, a broad range of subjects were discussed, among which were common efforts and threats regarding counterterrorism. During that exchange, the nature of specific threats were discussed, but they did not discuss sources, methods, or military operations. Then Dina Powell released a statement through the White House saying the story is false. The president only discussed the common threats that both countries faced. But Anderson, nowhere in these statements that were released by Tillerson, Powell, or that statement that was delivered by the National Security Advisor, is there any kind of denial that the president released classified information to the Russians? And of course, that's a deeply sensitive topic, in that the president, during the campaign, time and again, went after Hillary Clinton, accusing her of repeatedly leaking classified information, releasing classified information through a private email server. And we should also note one final thing that that I think is very interesting to pass on to our viewers. During the briefing today, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said H.R. McMaster would be briefing reporters tomorrow on the president's upcoming foreign trip. I've asked the White House whether McMaster will still be at that briefing tomorrow. Have not gotten a response. Obviously, if McMaster does not show up at that briefing, that's a pretty telling sign that they are trying to really circle the wagons on this one.
We should also point out, Jim, it's not a coincidence that most of those statements pretty much sound almost word for word the same, and that they are specific. The fact that they don't specifically say he didn't reveal classified information, that's just not an oversight. That's just not an accident that the White House put out statements that forgot to address that.
It's a lot of spin, Anderson. It's not a lot of clarity, and this is the sort of denial speak that you get from administrations when there are very serious questions being raised. And obviously up on Capitol Hill, they're raising some very serious questions tonight, and Republicans are tearing their hair out, wishing they could just get through a day in this town without this White House doing serious damage to itself, Anderson.
Jim Acosta, appreciate that. We got new reporting on what the shared intelligence was all about. CNN's Evan Perez joins us now with more of that. How does this tie into the reporting that you've done on the airline laptop ban?
Well, Anderson, back on March 31st, when we were reporting that story, we worked with the intelligence agencies for a couple of days, specifically to remove any references of the type that the president is allegedly discussed with these top two Russian officials there in the Oval Office. They specifically did not want us to mention the city, and they said that specifically, if you mention these types of things, the terrorist groups will be able to figure out that we have certain collection methods, that our allies have certain collection methods, and this could lead to lives being put in danger. Not only sources of methods are being put in danger, but perhaps people who are inside the Islamic State, people who are inside ISIS might be put at risk as a result of this reporting. So we worked with the intelligence agencies over a couple of days, and we removed the things that really we didn't have any interest in trying to put people's lives in danger. We wanted to make sure that the public understood the grave danger that this laptop bomb, this intelligence showed, but we didn't really want to put anybody's lives in danger. And so we worked with the intelligence agencies to remove this from those stories.
Evan, let me ask you, when McMaster says in his statement the president didn't reveal, talk about sources and methods, from your reporting, what it sounds like is if there had been any level of detail discussed with these Russians, just as if there had been a level of detail in the story you first reported weeks ago, that could have allowed adversaries or enemies in ISIS and elsewhere to figure out what sources or methods perhaps were being used. So it wasn't a question of whether the president actually said, oh, this is how this was collected. By just telling the details, it's possible the information, the Russians in this case, could figure out what the sources and methods were.
Right. They could reverse engineer the information to figure out how it was collected, to figure out how the U.S. had obtained it. And Anderson, here's the other part of this. I think the broader context here is that the president, I think, still regards Russia as not the adversary here. He really believes that the United States and Russia should be able to partner in the fight against ISIS, and that obviously is not a controversial issue. The issue is that the Russians have other motives as well. They have other agendas there. They want to prop up the regime of Bashar Assad in Damascus, and if they figure out how the United States is collecting certain information there, then that could put those sources of information at risk. We don't know where that information can go, and that was what was really emphasized to us when we were reporting this story back in March.
All right, Evan, thanks very much. We should know that we invited anyone from the White House, obviously, to join us tonight, but have since been told that they are done for the night. Our invitation, of course, stands throughout the hour. Joining us now, our team of national security, intelligence, legal, and political experts: Steve Hall, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, John Kirby, Philip Mudd, Laura Coates, Jim Sciutto, and Harvard Law Professor Alan Dershowitz. Jim, I know your communication devices have been blown up with people you've been talking to. What's the reaction you're getting? What do you have to add to this?
The reaction is exasperation and deep, deep concern on a number of levels. One here, because it's classified information. That's obvious. Two, that the Russians were the ones to receive this classified information, a prime adversary in the view of the U.S. intelligence community today. Three, that it appears to relate to a sensitive intelligence sharing relationship, which is very difficult to build over time. There are countries that you share intel with as a matter of alliances, the UK, France, etc. That's natural. There are others that you don't want public because of the nature of those relationships. That country doesn't want it public that it's sharing this kind of sensitive information with the U.S. Those three things make this particularly serious. A former senior U.S. intelligence official described it to me this way: I have never before seen a senior government official so carelessly share information that endangers a sensitive relationship. Unprecedented in the view.
If an ally of ours, which is gathering intelligence or sharing intelligence with us, believes that the president cannot be quiet about that information in front of the Russians and others, they're less likely to share intelligence.
Absolutely, and it's not the first time we've heard that kind of concern from other allies, concerned about what they share with the president and what comes out. And I would just add to something Evan said. This relates to the laptop threat, the idea of getting a bomb hidden in personal electronics onto an airplane. I've been speaking to sources. There is a debate going on today about extending the laptop ban from those 8 Muslim-majority countries to Europe, possibly even to the U.S. This is something being talked about right now because this threat is considered right now the greatest, most immediate, clear and present terror danger to the U.S. So you're in beyond the obvious sensitive territory you're in with the nature of the information, the relationship. The nature of the threat makes it about the most sensitive territory you can get into.
Professor Dershowitz, I heard you say that if what the Washington Post and New York Times reported is true, how did you characterize this?
This is the most serious accusation ever made against the sitting president relating to national security.
Ever?
If it's true. I can't think of any other president who has ever put in danger the national security, if it's true. Remember that Russia gives information to Iran, that gives it to Hezbollah, gives it to Syria. We're talking about agencies like Jordan, Israel, England, that may have worked for 5 years to get somebody into ISIS at a leadership level. He's going to be killed. If it's electronic, they're going to disclose this information. This is so serious. And now we have to unite. We have to put aside all the stuff about Comey, all the stuff about whether the campaign coordinated. We have to focus on this issue because Republicans and Democrats alike will not be able to defend the president against this if it's true. Now we have to find out if it's true. The first step is damage control. The second step is doing something to protect us. Do we have to ban the laptops tomorrow or this week? We have to focus on this. Do not politicize this issue. That's the greatest risk we face now.
Steve Hall, you certainly know about classified information in your career. The CIA, you certainly know about Russia. I mean, the White House is saying the president didn't share sources or methods with the Russians. Washington Post is reporting he shared classified information with specifics about a looming threat. That's not the same thing as sources or methods as the White House characterized it. But to Evan's point, can you kind of reverse engineer if you get some information and figure out what the sources and methods are that might endanger whoever gathered that?
Well, Anderson, if anybody can reverse engineer something, it's certainly the Russians. But actually, my greater concern here is that this is going to have a widespread chilling effect on all of the intelligence relationships that we have with all of our allies. The ripple effects are going to be incredible, regardless as to whether or not it's true. Because having run these relationships myself a number of times, years overseas, our allies pass this information with the expectation that we are going to keep it to ourselves and not share it with others, certainly not the Russians, without talking to them first. And when we don't do that, and if it's true that the president spread this without the approval of the liaison service that gave it to him, they're simply going to become more conservative. They're going to stop sharing information, and that puts the United States of America at significantly greater risk at what we share most with our liaison relationships with, and that's counterterrorism information.
But
so
Anderson,
this is serious,
risk,
really, regardless.
That risk was created by the Washington Post. That second risk. The Washington Post published this material. I don't blame them. Somebody leaked it. We now learn from something the editor, the Washington Post reporter, told us, that the leak had to come from within the United States. It wasn't from Russia. How do we know this? Because the reporter has said that the leaker, the source, quote, didn't want to compound the problem. Russia would want to compound the problem. So we now know that an American intelligence source leaked this information. It's the leaking of the information that creates the compounding problem of intelligence services. It would have been bad enough if this had happened, but nobody knew about it. But now we have two problems. One, sources and methods now can be found by the Russians, and two, our allies know that this was disclosed.
Although you could make, I would assume, Phil, that you could make, Jim Sciutto, that you could make the argument that the United States would have to inform allied intelligence services that this information had been disclosed.
That's right, and that would be part of the damage control. We're not talking about message damage control here, right? We're talking about risk damage control, which is obviously far more important.
General Hurtling, I mean, the information the president reportedly revealed, that we're not talking about confidential, we're not talking about secret, we're not talking about top secret. This is code word information. Can you explain what that is? What kind of dots can you connect with that?
Yeah, code word is ultimate in security clearances, Anderson. It means that the programs are so significant, the sources and methods are so critically important that any discrimination or any leaks of information about that might give away damage that the program exists. I've been read in on code word programs before, both in combat and peacetime, and you're not only read in, you're also read off when you leave the program, which means you say, I will never disclose that I know anything about this program, that I will give any information about it, or even say what the code word is that describes the program. And it's because it is so dangerous, and any kind of information that comes out on a code word program could affect the fight for an adversary for that intelligence. So when you're trying to connect the dots, any specific item might be able to lead you to the source and the methods. Even though the sources and the methods and the military operations, as General McMaster said, were not given, if anything was given up, that might lead a very wise intelligence service, the Russian intelligence service, to find out more things and connect dots. It could destroy the program, ruin the relationship with the other country, generate a lack of trust with all other nations, because whatever country that this came from, others are going to see it as well. It's not just going to affect that one-on-one relationship. It's going to affect everybody that shares intelligence with our intelligence community, because they're afraid to give it to them, because they don't want it given to the president, who might give it to Russia.
Phil, you worked both the CIA and the FBI. What do you make of the fact that this was a statement, according to the Washington Post and the New York Times, made by the President of the United States to two Russian officials who are, one of them is at the center of the ongoing investigations, and who were allowed into the Oval Office, the day after the FBI director is fired? I mean, you would think of all the times somebody would be careful of what they said and how they said it. It would have been that meeting right there, photos of which are being provided by the Russians because U.S. reporters were not allowed in the room at the time.
Anderson, I have a different perspective. There was a mistake here. It wasn't what the president said. Look, in October 2015, the Russians lost 220 plus people in an attack by ISIS on an aircraft over the Sinai, 220 plus. If the president had not warned them about threats to aircraft and a Russian aircraft went down tomorrow, what would we say? Would we say the Americans shouldn't tell the Russians about threats from ISIS? Two mistakes were made here, and they are significant. The first was a minor mistake. It was not a moral sin. You have got to tell your foreign partners, if you're the President of the United States, I'm going to reveal your information to the Russians. I don't believe the Russians are going to leak this to ISIS. They are killing ISIS periodically in Syria. The second mistake, which I think is significant, was by General McMaster. I respect him, but he's playing us for fools. There are two elements of intelligence: what you know and how we know it. What you know about threats to aircraft and who told you. What he told us today is the president did not reveal sources and methods. Who told us? He said nothing about what the president said in terms of the actual threat. Don't play us for fools. If the president revealed the actual threat without revealing the source of the threat, please tell us, and don't play us for idiots. General McMaster really lost some credibility today. He should have been honest with us. He was not.
Rear Admiral Kirby, what do you expect Russia to do with information like this? And also, the reporting from CNN earlier was that Rex Tillerson's statement sounded like it was coordinated with the White House. It didn't come from the State Department itself, because a lot of State Department people had no idea that the statement had even been made.
Yeah, so on the second part, I have talked to some colleagues at the State Department. It seems like this was moving, the statement was moving so fast, and the White House wanted to present one coordinated set of cabinet official statements all at once to kind of rip the Band-Aid off. They went so fast that not everybody in the communications shop was fully read in on the idea that he was doing a statement and what it said. That's unusual. I honestly have never seen that happen before, but it does. I do see the logic there. They were moving fast. On your first question, Anderson, it really depends on what kind of information it was. I will just say this. The Russians are not only not our friends, particularly in Syria, they are acting in an inimical way to our interests in Syria and directly opposing what we're trying to get done in Syria. And they have done little to nothing to fight ISIS in Syria. So whatever this information was, if it was ISIS related, I fail to see the great benefit. And on this point, I kind of disagree with Phil. I don't see the great benefit here in sharing with them sensitive information about the fight against ISIS in Syria. If, however, they were in peril of being in an attack, then okay, you might want to share some, but then you do it in a more deliberate, scheduled, measured fashion. You discuss this with the intelligence community before you sit down with the Russians, and you lay out the degree to which you're going to share what with them and how much. It doesn't sound to me like this was done in any kind of a coordinated fashion. And the only thing else I'd say is you're talking about a president who doesn't get the intel briefing every single day. When you get it every day and you really absorb it and you take some time with it, then you know the nuance, then you know the complexity, then you're more careful when you're speaking in a public or even a private meeting. This is a man who's not getting it every day, and I worry that because he's not, he's lacking that nuance. He's lacking that touch of fidelity about what information is really too sensitive to put out.
All right, we have a lot more to talk about tonight. This is a fast-moving story, including the latest reaction from Capitol Hill, especially from a number of influential Republicans with some very strong views about dysfunction in the White House. I'll speak as well with a Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee who's obviously investigating improper ties to Russia.